Something about the timeline was bothering me. I'd already established that the Billy Branham Pentecostal Tabernacle was actually planted by Roy E. Davis and filled with congregants from his church from before he was extradited on criminal charges. I'd also established that Davis was a high-ranking member of the Ku Klux Klan and working with multiple white supremacy groups. I'd learned that the prophet was working with E. Howard Cable and discovered the history of the Ku Klux Klan's invasion of the Indiana government in the mid-1920s. I'd learned that F.F. Bosworth had a background in healing cults, healing revivals, and work with a leader who used religion for political influence, money, and power. I'd also learned that Bosworth was doing damage control for those healed who never improved, some of which died. I discovered that shortly after working with Cadle, the prophet and his second wife Meta were married by a United Brethren minister, which was a direct result of E. Howard Cadle planting Brethren churches in the area. But if the prophet wanted people to think that his healing ministry started in 1947, and that his Pentecostal experience started long after leading Roy Davis's Pentecostal church congregation, I wondered, what wasn't he wanting us to see? Why did the name of the Pentecostal Tabernacle change to Branham Tabernacle in 1945? Was he still working with Roy Davis and the Ku Klux Klan? I began to study the early photographs of the prophet's early church and noticed something that I had never seen before. As many times as I had looked at the early congregation posing inside the church, for as many years as I had seen that photograph, I had never noticed that one person in the photograph was completely blacked out. I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone had meticulously covered the person in dark black ink, so carefully that they did not leave a trace of the body. At casual glance, it made it look as though the figure was a shadow of another person, yet it sat erect. It was not cast from another person blocking light. Who was this mysterious figure, inked out in the early Billy Branham Pentecostal Tabernacle photos? It was clear that part of the prophet's timeline had been erased. Was this figure involved with whatever was erased from the timeline? When the name of the prophet's church was changed and the first advertisement of the Branham Tabernacle was published in the newspapers, I found a familiar name. The Reverend Robert Doherty was listed in the advertisement. It was a name that I knew well, though it did not seem to fit with the timeline of this 1945 newspaper article. The prophet claimed to have healed Doherty's daughter Betty, yet he also claimed that his gift of healing came in 1947, 2 years after 1945. The story of her healing was published in a pamphlet that was no longer available to message believers, that was entitled, "I Was Not Disobedient to the Heavenly Vision." I had never read the pamphlet. A former message minister had a copy of the tract and was able to let me read it for the first time. The author of the publication, the prophet, sounded much different than the illiterate backwoods prophet that I grew up hearing. The words written were eloquent and refined, very formal. It was not the Kentucky hillbilly English that the prophet used in the ministry that I grew up hearing. To my surprise, the prophet was sending a message to readers about a vision of white-robed people. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was looking for clues into what happened with Roy E. Davis and his involvement with the Ku Klux Klan, searching for the missing years after 1939, when Davis was extradited to Hot Springs, Arkansas. As I looked at the 1945 date of the publication and read about his white-robed vision and healing campaign, I thought about the version of the message that we were told and how different it was from recorded history. Being raised to believe his healing ministry started in 1947, it was very difficult for me to see this 1945 date. Before reading this, I'd assumed that his attempts at healing in the early 1940s had failed, and that the prophet was trying to claim he didn't yet have the gift. This tract confirmed that he did have a healing ministry before 1947, and that he was fully aware of his gift. I knew by now that the leaders of the message were hiding something, but I'd never considered hiding an entire healing campaign that was for white-robed people. The Ku Klux Klan were known as the White Knights, and every single member was given a white robe.